Hello, my friends, and welcome back to an episode of Rant World with me, Notorious BLT. So, I was having this thought the other day about food. I know, big surprise, right? But particularly, why do some foods cost so much more than others when they might be kind of gross? And some of you may disagree about the grossness of certain foods, like, for example, oysters. I don't really care for oysters. To me, they're basically just very salty goop fish. It's just like eating very salty tasting goop. Not my favorite thing in the world. Like I've talked to I hate that happened. I don't know why the explodey thing went that way, but all right. Anyway, I don't understand why some foods are so much more expensive than others. I understand that in some cases it's like rarity, which makes it sound like it's an MMO or something. But how hard it is to get things. Like, let's see, saffron. Saffron is a spice that is incredibly expensive because there's not a lot of it. It's very difficult to get. I don't remember what flower it actually comes from, but it's like the pistil, I think. It comes from the pistil of certain flowers. I think maybe it's orchids. I don't remember. I don't remember what kind of flower it is. But that's not the point. The point is that it's very rare and it's very expensive. Same thing with like oysters. Oysters are also very expensive. I don't know if that's due to rarity or what. But like things like pate, which is basically just mashed up goose liver, is also extremely expensive, as far as I recall. I have tried it once, and I didn't really see the appeal. To me, it just kind of tasted a little gross, and it just didn't really get. I mean, not gross. It was just it's just definitely not for me. It's not like, and I'm not saying that everything has to have this fantastic taste in order to be worth it. That's not what I mean. But I do think that there are a lot of things that, for whatever reason, there's this, I don't know if you would call it a stigma, but there's this idea that they should cost a lot because, they're very rare, and I don't know if that's really the case. Like, when people have fugu, which is, it's pufferfish. But the thing about pufferfish or blowfish is that you have to, cut, you have to be licensed in a very specific fashion in order to make fugu because there's only a small portion of the fish that is actually edible. And when I say edible, I don't mean that you'll get sick if you eat it, or that it's spines or something. I mean that if you eat it, you will die. or just get heinously sick if you're really lucky. I mean, really, really lucky. I'm pretty sure fugu does kill you if you don't have the right stuff, or if you eat the wrong part. So, that this is another thing that I don't exactly understand because, for one, I guess if you're an adrenaline junkie, I can kind of understand it, because you're like, oh well, I mean, I'll do this thing that might kill me, and you get the adrenaline rush. But still, why? Why in God's name would you go through that? I don't understand. Just, go skydiving or something. That's more safe, I would think. Because, well, actually, is it more safe? Because it's kind of, thinking about it now, it's like, well, if you're falling from a plane and your chute doesn't open, you're kind of just dead. But then if you eat the wrong part of the fugu, you're also just kind of just dead. So, are they the same? I don't know. What's the number of people that die every year, or the percentage of people that eat fugu that die every year? Because you got to look at it like this: if only 500 people every year eat fugu, and one of them dies, but then several thousand people go and go skydiving every year, and two of them die, it's actually less safe to eat fugu because you have, the ratio of death to fugu consumption is higher. If you get what I mean. This kind of goes back to the statistics episode, I guess. the most exciting of all subjects, the things that people don't really want to talk about because it's boring as hell. But it is interesting to some people like myself. But in any case, it's something that I don't quite get, and maybe it's because I don't really like some of the things that are really expensive, like oysters, for example. Although there are not to say that I hate all shellfish, because that is not true. Like, I love scallops. Scallops are delicious, as are, well, clams in some dishes I find delicious. My mom makes a clam spaghetti that is delicious. It is so good. But I mean, it's also like drenched in garlic and white wine sauce, so it's kind of hard to beat, right? Let's see, what else is there. There's for shellfish, you've got like crab, which crab is okay, I guess. Crab and lobster are two things that I guess I don't fully understand the appeal of. I have had them; they're good, but I don't know. To me, lobster just seems like it's still just too much trouble. And maybe the same with crab. I'm not really sure. It's been a long. I've actually had lobster more recently than I have crab. And, I mean, it's more that I've observed somebody eating lobster because, quite frankly, for me, I'm just like, I don't, like, you're putting in so much work to open the stupid thing. If you don't know what a lobster is, it's basically a big bug at the bottom of the ocean. It's a scavenger. It's got, like, two big claws on the front that it uses to grab and pull apart carrion and eat it. They're not predators. Like, they don't go out and like try to find living fish and eat them or anything, because they're not fast enough in general, I don't think. But anyway, there's also rock lobster, which is a different kind of lobster. But we're getting too far off the point here. It's got a hard, chitinous outer shell that makes getting to the meat inside very difficult. In some cases. Now, some people are very good at dismantling lobsters and don't mind getting through the shell, like my mother and my girlfriend. They're both fine with dismantling lobsters. My dad and I, not so much. If somebody's like, hey, here's lobster claws and stuff, and, it's all, the shell's been taken off, I'm like, all right, cool, that's fine with me, I'm good with that. But if you're like, here's a lobster, eat it, and I'm like, no, we're not doing this. This is not for me, I'm sorry. Actually, apparently, there was a prison, I think it was either in Massachusetts or Maine, where the inmates at one point actually wrote a letter to the warden and said, please no more lobster, because, for one, back in this time, bathing was not a normal thing that happens all the time. And also, imagine trying to extract the meat from these pointy creatures, because their shells are kind of pointy. Constantly, you eventually end up getting sores on your hands because, let me tell you, as somebody who worked at a country club where there was what I can only describe as lobster genocide, at least once a year, which it was my least favorite time of year for many reasons, you will get, I don't want to say infected skin, but that's kind of what it's basically is. You get these little, like, micro abrasions on your hands, and they get infected very easily because lobsters are also kind of filthy creatures. They're kind of filthy. So it's no fun dealing with lobsters all the time. But anyway, these inmates, for probably that kind of reason, because, antibiotics were not a thing back then, so you couldn't have just like a topical antibiotic where you're like, yeah, well, this wound on my hand is not going to get infected because I put this stuff on it that kills the bacteria. Yeah, that doesn't happen back then. And also, I'm assuming that working for your meal like that is maybe not something that inmates really want to do. And you may say, well, they're inmates, they've clearly committed a crime, and so what do we care about what they want? Well, they're still people. Some people who were in prison clearly are maybe not the best people. I think I've talked briefly about a person who I can only describe as a madman, psychopath, murder hobo named Jeffrey Dahmer in the United States, who was also a cannibal. So there are certainly, that was so bad. There are certainly people in that went to prisons that I would say, probably don't deserve even the time of day from anybody or any kind of consideration whatsoever, much like Mr. Dahmer. But for the most part, a lot of people that are in prison, this goes to something that I think is just it's like a social conversation. Like, is prison for punishment or is it for reform? But in any case, people still, need to be treated like people, unless of course they're like horrible monsters. Like if somebody went and just like murdered a bunch of people because it was fun. Like, I'm not sure that's a person anymore. I think that's a crazy person. Like, or that's a crazy monster is what that is. Not a person. It's a crazy monster that is hiding in in human skin. But enough about that kind of stuff. Let me talk a bit about this whole thing with the lobster thing. They had this thing called Lobster Fest at this country club that I worked at. And I don't mean to sound like, I was a hoity-toity person. I was a dishwasher, okay? So don't take this for anything that it's not. Which also means that I got the brunt of the stank of the lobster. Holy crap, did I get the stank of it. So all these people would pay a bunch of money to have lobsters at this Lobster Fest. Several hundred lobsters every year would be consumed at this event, or at least prepared at this event. And it made the entire kitchen stink for weeks. Even though we would always, at this particular kitchen, we had 2 big yearly cleanups. We had the end of year cleanup, as in like the end of the operating season. And then we also had the end of Lobster Fest cleanup. Because holy hell did it stink like holy hell. I forget, is it? Yeah, there's a lobster. There's a lizard right there who's all like getting ready to kill my ass. So we would go through and basically kind of dismantle the kitchen and attempt to remove all the lobster detritus. But inevitably, you always miss something. And you find out a couple weeks later because it stinks to high heaven. Such a horrid stink, I'm not sure it can be fully described with words. Because seafood, when it starts to go, as in when it starts to go bad, gets this ammonia smell mixed in with like the worst funky fart smell you can possibly imagine. So at the end of year cleanup, inevitably, when we would dismantle the kitchen again, we would find like a piece of a shell somewhere with some disintegrated stuff, because that was the meat that had somehow been left behind because somebody was not being diligent in their cleaning. But in any case, we were talking about the expensiveness of food, but that's the whole thing with the lobsters. But yeah, I mean, with that whole thing, the head chef also hated that time because, there's a lot of ways to prepare lobsters. One of them is, I'm going to say, less humane than others. I will not describe it because I also detested even seeing this. You may say, well, they're invertebrates that have, no central nervous system. They don't really feel pain. Well, I don't know if that's entirely true, because after what I've witnessed, I'm really not sure that that's entirely the case. If you're wondering why I died right there, it's because I was looking at a map and I wasn't paying attention, and then I turned and saw that I had died. Hooray. Great. Or actually, it's not that I turned and saw that I had died. It's more that in the headphones I heard the dong sound of, you died. And then I turned and saw and was like, fuck, I drowned. Oh, I said a bad word. The Google DeepMind language filter is going to have a field day. Oh, well. I henceforth expect this video to get 0 views. Thank you, Google and YouTube. Anyway. So lobster is another one that I just don't fully understand. I mean, girlfriend describes the meat as being kind of sweet. And of course you have to, like, I guess the traditional way to eat it in Massachusetts and Maine is to basically drench it in butter. Which, I mean, anything drenched in butter is going to taste at least kind of okay, right? Because butter is amazing. But what's another... okay, so, like, saffron I get because it's a spice, and it's very rare, and it's used in a couple of different dishes. Like, if I'm right, it's used in paella, which is a dish I haven't made because I used to hate seafood, and paella is basically like a giant seafood stew. That's kind of the best way I can oh my god, excuse me. The best way I can describe it. I should look up a paella recipe and make some paella. That would be really good. Anyway, so like steak is also fairly expensive. That one I guess I understand because I actually like the taste. I suppose I am very biased in this because if it's something that I actually enjoy the taste of, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally get it. But if something that I find disgusting or that I just don't enjoy, then I'm like, well, why would you eat it? I don't, it doesn't make any sense. Not to say that, all these things don't make any sense. Just this one in particular does not make any sense to me. What is another one that's really strange? Abalone, which is something I've never had. But I have seen, like, cooking shows that involve, or not involve abalone, but, like, they talk about abalone. It's another invertebrate shellfish. But if I'm right, it's, like, orange? But they're not easy to get. I do remember watching a program, though, about this. It was not about abalone, but this dude who was an abalone diver, I guess. Oh my god, why is the motorcycle so loud? Oh yes, it's because it's being piloted by a jerk. Anyway, this Australian dude, was diving for abalone in this kind of murky water when suddenly he went blind and had this horrible pain in his chest. He was not having a heart attack. He was not actually going blind. His torso, from head to waist, was inside a great white shark. A great white shark. It's not really a laughing matter, but sometimes I just nervously laugh because I'm like, oh man, that's freaking terrible. A great white shark had put him in its mouth. And of course he tried to escape, like any reasonable person would. And eventually did get away from it. And he's alive, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be able to talk to him on the program. But it's just like, holy crap, dude. You are, for one, very lucky that this thing didn't just, like, tear you to shreds. Because this is one of the problems that goes back to a previous episode. People get very upset about, like, animal, quote-unquote, attacks. Even if they're not really attacks, it's more just, well, I guess in the most technical sense, it's an attack. Because in order for the thing to consume you, it must kill you. But, like, these sharks are not actually trying to eat people. It just sees something that looks to it like a seal. Because, sharks don't really have, like, the greatest eyesight. They have decent eyesight. A pretty good eyesight, I would say. But they're more reliant on the sniffer. They are very, very good at sniffing out blood. Like, that is probably their most sensitive sense, is their sense of smell. From right, sharks can detect, like, 1 part per million of blood in seawater, like a mile away. Yeah, it's some ridiculous amount. And some ridiculous distance. Or not all sharks, but great white sharks and some of the other predatory sharks can detect blood from a very, very far distance. But in any case, part of why people get so scared of these things, I think, is that when you see the wounds that they leave, they are not pretty. One bite from a great white shark is devastating to the human body. Absolutely devastating. But again, it's not like it means to just cause harm and then leave you there. Like, it's hungry, it thinks you're a seal, and it bites you, and that's it. And sometimes they come back and they're like, was that actually a seal? And it just tasted like ass for a second? I don't know. But that is one of the... So anyway, abalone is one of those other weird foods that I'm just like, I don't really get... Like, it's rarity instead of deliciousness. But then again, if food was... if food prices were based entirely on deliciousness, I think barbecue would be the most expensive freaking meal on the planet. And that would just be a travesty. So you know what? I'm glad that some of the more disgusting foods in the world are super expensive, because I'm probably not going to eat them. I mean, I'll try them at least once, if I can afford it. I will try them at least once. I probably will not try fugu, because I'm fine with getting disgusted, but not dying. So, there's that. Not that I have, like, the smallest amount of faith in people that would prepare fugu that's, possible. But, oh my god, that Leviathan is just, this thing scared the bejesus out of me every time. They're just so big. What is it? I'm trying to think of some of the other, like, super rare foods that are really, really expensive, but I want to say steak tartare is really expensive, but I think that's also because it takes somebody who really knows what they're doing to prepare it correctly without, infecting you with parasites and other bad stuff. Let's see, what else? Well, what other foods would be, like, unacceptable to be so expensive? We've got barbecue, what else? Because there's a lot of really good, cheap food. Oh my god, ribs. Oh, if you've never had barbecued ribs, beef or pork ribs. I mean, this obviously goes for the people that are at least somewhat carnivorous. If you're a vegan or a vegetarian, I'm sorry, but ribs are freaking delicious. Oh my god, Brazilian barbecue, or a Brazilian steakhouse. One of the craziest dining experiences of my, maybe not craziest, but like, it is the only time that I think you can ever achieve what my friends and I refer to as the meat sweats. It is just meat after meat after meat, and it is delicious. If you ever get the chance to go to a Brazilian steakhouse and get rodizio, freaking get it. It is worth every penny. The food is just unbelievable. Brazilians, y'all know how to make some meats. Alright, folks, so that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you all did enjoy it. If you did, you know what to do. That's me from Notorious BLT. Hope you have a fantastic day, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye, folks.